My name is Pastor Samuel Carter, 50, from Nashville, Tennessee. I died for 6 minutes.
I saw what waits beyond this life. It was more real than anything I had ever known, and it left me shaken to my core. I had spent the better part of my life serving the Lord. For over 25 years, I had stood behind the pulpit, preached the gospel, led my congregation, and watched people come to faith. My ministry was my identity, my calling. I thought I was fulfilling God's purpose, guiding people toward Him, doing the work He had set before me. But in the past few years, something began to shift within me. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, just a nagging thought at the back of my mind. I remember one Sunday, standing before the congregation, preaching about faith and sacrifice. When I looked out and saw it, the people weren't paying attention to the message. Instead, they were distracted, some by their phones, some by the latest trends, and others lost in their own thoughts. Their attention was elsewhere, and it troubled me. I had always believed that the message of Christ was life-changing, but now I began to wonder if it was lost on them. It wasn't just that, it was the way we ran our church. We had grown, our congregation had doubled in the last few years, and the expansion felt good. The new building, the new programs, the bright banners with smiling faces. But somewhere in the midst of all this, I started feeling disconnected. What were we really doing here? Were we truly building up the body of Christ, or were we just building a bigger business? I could no longer ignore the signs, the focus on attendance numbers, the constant push for bigger donations, the emphasis on wealth and prosperity in many of our teachings. People were walking in for services, leaving with their heads full of promises about material blessings. The idea of Christ as the King of prosperity was everywhere, and I started to wonder, had I become a part of this? I had spent years preaching that Jesus came to bring freedom and eternal life. But now I saw how we had allowed the church to become a place of worldly ambition. In sermons, we spoke of blessing and favor, often in terms of wealth, success, and social status. But where was the gospel of sacrifice, humility, and spiritual growth? I could feel the weight of it, the very thing I had been building, the church I had poured my heart and soul into, felt wrong. The people, my congregation, had come to see church as a place of personal gain rather than spiritual growth. At home, things weren't much better. Miriam, my wife, noticed it too. The long nights, the stress, the way I seemed increasingly distant. I couldn't explain it. How could I? How could I admit that I was no longer sure of what I was doing? How could I confess to her that my heart wasn't fully in it anymore? "Samuel," Miriam said one evening, sitting down across from me, "you've been gone too long. I see it. The weight is too much for you to carry alone. It's okay to admit that you're struggling." Her words struck me harder than I expected. I was supposed to be the strong one, the spiritual leader, but now the cracks were showing, not just in my ministry but in my own faith. The path I had been walking felt more like a road to exhaustion than a journey of fulfillment. I had built this church to honor God, but somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of His true purpose. I thought of the people I had been guiding, how many of them had become trapped in the same cycle of seeking outward success instead of spiritual depth. Were we really helping them, or had we simply been comforting them in their ignorance? It was only in moments like this, when I sat quietly, away from the hustle of ministry, that I could hear the voice inside me asking the hard questions, the ones I didn't want to answer. "What are you doing, Samuel? Are you truly serving God, or are you serving your own ambition?" The weight of that question lingered in my soul, yet I didn't have an answer. I felt like I was losing something, but I wasn't sure what it was, and worse, I couldn't shake the fear that I might never find the answers I needed. I remember the first time the thought crossed my mind, what if I'm not doing this right? What if I've led these people astray? But I quickly pushed it away, focusing instead on the next sermon, the next event, the next meeting. It was easier to focus on those things than to confront the growing disillusionment within. The days turned into weeks, and the unease grew stronger. I could feel it eating away at me, pulling at my resolve. I had spent my whole life working for the kingdom, but now I began to wonder if I had been building the wrong kind of kingdom altogether. But I pushed through. The ministry had to go on. People needed me. I had to keep moving forward. And then one evening, after a particularly draining day, it happened. The weight of the questions never left me. I tried to bury them with busyness, new church events, community outreach programs, planning the next big sermon series. But no matter how much I did, the nagging sense that something was wrong grew louder. Every time I stood at the pulpit, it felt like I was simply reading from a script. The words were there, but the heart behind them was fading. I could see it in the faces of the people. Their eyes were empty, distracted. They came to church to check a box, to feel good about their Sunday, but the transformation I once prayed for seemed distant. I had built something, but it wasn't what I had hoped for. It was a house of bricks, not a house of faith. Then one day, it all came crashing down. It started with a slight pain in my chest. Nothing alarming at first, just a tightness that I dismissed as stress. But by the time I sat down for dinner with Miriam and the kids, the pain worsened. It felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't take a full breath. "Samuel, you don't look good," Miriam said, her eyes narrowing with concern. "I'm fine," I replied, trying to brush it off, "just a little tired. It'll pass." But it didn't. The pain intensified, my vision blurred, and soon I was clutching the table, gasping for air. Miriam sprang into action, dialing 911. The world seemed to warp around me as I gasped for air, and my thoughts started to scatter. "I can't breathe. I can't." The next thing I knew, I was no longer in my home. I died for 6 minutes. There were no flashing lights, no tunnel to walk through, nothing dramatic like the stories you hear. Instead, I felt a profound silence, a stillness unlike anything I had ever known. The pain I had felt in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold emptiness that felt like the absence of life itself. I was suspended, not floating, not falling, just suspended in an eerie stillness that stretched on without end. I could still hear faint sounds from my earthly life, the distant hum of machines, the murmurs of voices, but they felt so far away. The world I had known, the life I had lived, seemed like a distant memory. It was as if I were no longer tethered to my body, to anything earthly. I was somewhere else. I could feel the heaviness of my soul, weighed down by something I couldn't understand, a burden I had carried for years but had never fully acknowledged. The guilt was suffocating, guilt about the state of my ministry, my complacency in building a church that had become more about status and wealth than spiritual growth. Had I done enough? Had I truly led my congregation to Christ? Had I become a part of the very system I had once preached against? And then the presence entered. I could feel it before I saw it, a warmth, a love so deep and pure it made my heart ache with longing. I turned and there he was, Jesus. I had read about him, preached about him, but now seeing him in person, seeing the depth of his love and purity, was a different experience altogether. He radiated light, a light that was both soft and overwhelming, filling the very space around me. His gaze met mine, and I felt as though he could see right through me, into the very core of my being. "Samuel," his voice was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was the most real sound I had ever heard. His eyes, filled with compassion and sadness, held me in place. "I have brought you here to show you something." I swallowed, my throat tight, the weight of everything. The years of doubt, the years of questioning, suddenly felt so heavy. "Lord," I whispered, my voice shaky, "I don't know if I'm ready. I've led your people astray. I've built a church that isn't what you intended." Jesus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but comforting. "You have sought me, Samuel, but you have lost your way. The church has lost its way. But it is not too late." And then he showed me. I was suddenly standing in front of a vision. The church, but not the church I knew. Not the vibrant place I had spent my life building. What I saw was troubling. Leaders stood before their congregations, speaking of faith, but the message had shifted. Instead of preaching sacrifice and love, they spoke of prosperity and success. They promised riches and blessings in return for faith, but it was a shallow promise, empty words wrapped in gold. I saw the people sitting in the pews. Their eyes were glazed over. They were seeking something, more wealth, more status, but not the living, breathing relationship with God that was the foundation of the church. I realized then that this was the church I had built. I had fed into it, chasing numbers, chasing success, encouraging people to chase after prosperity. I had forgotten what it meant to serve, to give, to lead with humility. This is not my church, Samuel. Jesus' voice cut through my thoughts, clear and firm. This is a business. This is not what I intended. I felt my heart breaking as I understood the full weight of my failure. I had built something that had become a machine, not a ministry. The church I had spent decades creating was a place of distraction, not devotion. But how? I asked, my voice breaking. How can I fix this, Lord? Jesus looked at me with gentle but piercing eyes. You must go back, Samuel. You must return to lead my people with love, not for wealth. You must show them the true church, one of humility, one that focuses on service and spiritual growth, not worldly gain. His words were like a balm on a wound I hadn't even realized was there. I had been blind to the corruption creeping into my own ministry, and now I saw it all, the greed, the ambition, the misplaced priorities. But there was hope too. Jesus was offering me a chance to return, to make things right. I felt myself being pulled back. The peace I had felt in his presence was being replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. I had seen the truth. I had been given a second chance. I woke up in the hospital, gasping for air. Miriam was beside me, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I was alive, but everything had changed. My heart felt lighter, filled with clarity and a new purpose. I had seen the truth, and it was up to me to bring that truth back into the world. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, as if I had been plunged into freezing water. Miriam was beside me, her eyes wide with relief. The cold hospital room felt unfamiliar, but the truth I had seen, still lingered. I wasn't fully back, not yet, but my body felt different, heavy, like I was still tethered to something far beyond this world. I tried to sit up, but my muscles were weak, and my chest felt tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within me, something that couldn't be undone. I remembered the vision, the field of light, the warmth of Jesus' presence, and the revelation he had shown me. But then something shifted. The peaceful feeling started to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. I closed my eyes, trying to push the feeling away, but it only grew stronger. Suddenly, I felt as though I was falling deep into darkness. My chest tightened with fear, and the air became thick and suffocating. My stomach churned. Before I could grasp what was happening, I felt the pull of something dark. I was no longer in the hospital room. I was somewhere else, somewhere far colder, far darker. The stench of sulfur burned my nostrils, and I heard the sounds of distant wails, low, guttural screams that pierced the air like 1,000 souls in torment. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt a weight on my chest, a heavy force pinning me down. I looked around, and all I saw was fire. Hell. The realization hit me like a blow to the gut. I was in hell. The ground beneath me was jagged and blackened, the air thick with heat and smoke. I could see figures in the distance, dark shadows writhing in agony, their faces twisted in pain as they screamed for mercy. But the cries didn't stop, they only grew louder. I struggled to breathe, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was being pulled deeper into the inferno. The flames reached for me, licking at my skin, searing with a pain so intense it was unbearable. Then, I saw it, a massive, serpent-like creature slithering towards me, its eyes glowing with malice. Its scales shimmered with an unnatural darkness, and its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The serpent drew closer, its cold, soulless eyes locking onto mine. It was coming for me. "You belong here," a voice hissed from the creature's lips, a voice filled with venom and mockery. "You misled them, you preached lies, you used my name for your gain, and now you will pay." The creature lunged, its teeth sinking into my arm. The pain was excruciating, more than any physical injury I had ever felt. It was like the very essence of my soul was being torn apart. But then, through the pain, I heard it, Jesus' voice clear and commanding. "Samuel." I felt his presence before I saw him, the light piercing the darkness like a beacon. His voice echoed in the depths of hell, calming the storm of torment around me. The serpent recoiled, hissing in frustration. "You are not done yet," Jesus said, his tone firm but filled with mercy. "This is not your fate, not unless you choose it." I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself collapsing to the ground, writhing in the agony of the serpent's bite. The realization hit me harder than the flames around me. I had failed. For years, I had preached the wrong message. I had built a ministry that led people astray. I had made promises of wealth and success in God's name, but I hadn't shown them the truth that Jesus is not a means to an end, but the end itself. And here I was in hell, reaping the consequences of my actions. This torment, the despair I felt as the serpent sunk deeper into my soul, was a reflection of the eternal separation I had unwittingly led others toward. But Jesus was there. His light was so bright that the darkness around me began to fade. He approached me, his presence overwhelming the flames, and with a single word, the serpent dissolved into smoke. "You must return, Samuel," he said, kneeling beside me. "You have seen the truth. You were lost, but now you have been shown the way." With those words, the pain began to ebb. The heavy weight on my chest lifted. The fire receded. The cold, suffocating air turned to warmth, and the tormented cries of the souls around me began to fade. I felt myself being lifted, pulled back from the depths of hell, back toward the light. I didn't know what was happening, whether this was real, or if I had been lost in some sort of fevered dream. But as I rose, I felt something I had never felt before, a sense of responsibility. I woke up again in the hospital room. The first thing I felt was the overwhelming weight of regret. My body ached, my mind racing, and my chest felt tight. I gasped for air, feeling the physical pain, but it was the emotional pain that overwhelmed me. I had seen hell not just as a distant warning, but as a real consequence for my failures. What would you do if you were surrounded by a giant serpent, feeling its bite, only to find out it was all just a warning? Then I saw it, a massive serpent-like creature slithering towards me, its eyes glowing with malice. Its scales shimmered with an unnatural darkness, and its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The serpent drew closer, its cold, soulless eyes locking onto mine. It was coming for me. "You belong here," a voice hissed from the creature's lips, a voice filled with venom and mockery. "You misled them, you preached lies, you used my name for your gain, and now you will pay." The creature lunged, its teeth sinking into my arm. The pain was excruciating, more than any physical injury I had ever felt. It was like the very essence of my soul was being torn apart. But then, through the pain, I heard it, Jesus' voice clear and commanding. "Samuel." I felt his presence before I saw him, the light piercing the darkness like a beacon. His voice echoed in the depths of hell, calming the storm of torment around me. The serpent recoiled, hissing in frustration. "You are not done yet," Jesus said, his tone firm but filled with mercy. "This is not your fate, not unless you choose it." I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself collapsing to the ground, writhing in the agony of the serpent's bite. The realization hit me harder than the flames around me. I had failed. For years, I had preached the wrong message. I had built a ministry that led people astray. I had made promises of wealth and success in God's name, but I hadn't shown them the truth. The truth that Jesus is not a means to an end, but the end itself. And here I was, in hell, reaping the consequences of my actions. This torment, the despair I felt as the serpent sunk deeper into my soul, was a reflection of the eternal separation I had unwittingly led others toward. But Jesus was there. His light was so bright that the darkness around me began to fade. He approached me, his presence overwhelming the flames, and with a single word, the serpent dissolved into smoke. "You must return, Samuel," he said, kneeling beside me. "You have seen the truth. You were lost, but now you have been shown the way." With those words, the pain began to ebb. The heavy weight on my chest lifted, the fire receded, the cold, suffocating air turned to warmth, and the tormented cries of the souls around me began to fade. I felt myself being lifted, pulled back from the depths of hell, back toward the light. I didn't know what was happening, whether this was real, or if I had been lost in some sort of fevered dream. But as I rose, I felt something I had never felt before, a sense of responsibility. I woke up again in the hospital room. The first thing I felt was the overwhelming weight of regret. My body ached, my mind racing, and my chest felt tight. I gasped for air, feeling the physical pain, but it was the emotional pain that overwhelmed me. I had seen hell, not just as a distant warning, but as a real consequence for my failures. What would you do if you were surrounded by a giant serpent, feeling its bite, only to find out it was all just a warning? I woke up again in the hospital bed, but this time, everything felt different. The cold, sterile air around me felt heavy, as if the weight of everything I had just seen still clung to my body. The memories of hell, the serpent, the torment, the undeniable fear were fresh in my mind, but there was also something else, something more profound. I had been given a second chance. The pain in my chest was still there, a physical reminder of what I had just gone through. Miriam was sitting beside me, holding my hand, her eyes red from crying. I could see the relief in her face as she watched me take slow, steady breaths. But inside me, there was still a storm of questions, guilt, and regret. How could I have led people astray for so long? How could I have built a ministry that focused on wealth, status, and material success, rather than on Christ's true message of love, humility, and sacrifice? The question gnawed at me, and I couldn't escape it. I had seen the truth in the afterlife, and it was nothing like I had imagined. Hell wasn't just a place for the lost, it was a place of separation, a place where people's choices, their misguided paths, had real, eternal consequences. And I had been part of that system. I had preached a message that wasn't fully aligned with God's will, a message that had misled people into believing that success in this life was a sign of God's favor. I wasn't just guilty of preaching the wrong message, I was complicit in creating the environment that made people believe they could live for themselves and still claim to be followers of Christ. But as I lay there, the memory of Jesus' voice filled me with something else. I had seen hell, but I had also seen the truth, and in that truth, there was hope. "You must go back, Samuel." The voice echoed in my mind again, the same voice I had heard in the afterlife. It wasn't just a command, it was a call to action. I had seen the reality of the consequences for my actions, but I had also seen what I could do with the truth I had been given. I wasn't being punished for my failures. I was being shown a path to redemption, a path to lead people to true faith. But how? I whispered aloud, my voice hoarse from the ordeal. How do I fix what I've done? The room was still. The quiet hum of the machines was the only sound. But then I heard it again, a soft, loving presence, like a gentle breeze through the trees. "You must forgive yourself first." I froze. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to until that moment. The guilt I had carried, guilt for misleading people, guilt for leading them toward the wrong kind of faith, guilt for not being the leader I was called to be. It had paralyzed me. I thought that if I just kept moving, kept preaching, kept pretending to have it all figured out, it would go away, but it hadn't. You must forgive yourself, Samuel, before you can lead others to forgiveness. The words hit me like a wave. How could I forgive myself? How could I come to terms with everything I had done? I had spent so many years building my reputation, my ministry, my success, but now I saw that all of it was built on the wrong foundation. I had focused on the wrong things, and in doing so, I had misled so many people. But how, Lord? I asked again, this time with more desperation. By returning to the truth. I understood. I had to return to the truth of what Jesus had taught. The gospel wasn't about prosperity, success, or fame. It was about humility, sacrifice, and the radical love of God that calls people to serve one another, to give without expecting anything in return. It was about living with integrity and compassion, not focusing on building a larger congregation, but on building up the souls of people, leading them to a deeper, more authentic relationship with God. I could feel the weight lifting off my chest as I understood what I had to do. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about moving forward with a renewed mission. I had been shown the truth, and now I had to live it. You must also help them see the truth, the voice of Jesus continued. The church is not a place of worldly ambition, Sam. It is a place of transformation. It is not a place to get rich, but a place to give love, to give service, to give yourself. Lead them to me, and they will find their way. I realized in that moment that I had been living a lie. I had been preaching a message that fed into people's desires for more, for success, for recognition, but none of it was real. The true church wasn't about building bigger buildings or drawing bigger crowds. It was about serving, loving, and guiding others to the truth of God's kingdom. But how could I make it right? How could I change the way I had been living for all these years? How could I lead my congregation back to the truth? Suddenly I felt a rush of warmth, a wave of peace that washed over me, calming every part of my being. It was the same warmth I had felt in the presence of Jesus, that all-encompassing love that wiped away my fear, my regret, and my bitterness. Forgive yourself, Samuel. You are not lost. I have called you to this. You are not beyond redemption. And in that moment, I forgave myself. I understood that forgiveness wasn't about erasing my mistakes. It was about accepting that I had made them and choosing to move forward. It was about aligning myself with God's truth, not in some distant future, but right now. I had seen the consequences of leading people down the wrong path, and now I had a new mission to lead them to the truth. I opened my eyes, the reality of the moment flooding over me. Miriam was still holding my hand, her eyes filled with concern but also hope. I turned to her, my voice barely above a whisper. I have to do something, Miriam. I have to make it right. It had been a few months since that day, the day I saw hell, the day I faced the consequences of my actions, and the day I received the mercy and truth that changed me forever. I had left the hospital, but I had not left the experience behind. It still haunted me, but now it was a haunting of purpose, not despair. The lessons I had learned were not easy ones. I had been confronted with my own failures, the years of preaching a gospel that wasn't fully aligned with the truth of Christ. But I had also been given the chance to change, to make things right. I had seen the depths of my mistakes, but I had also seen the possibility of redemption. The first few weeks after my return to the world were a blur of reflection and prayer. I was quiet, listening to God's still small voice, seeking direction for what came next. I knew I couldn't go back to the way I was, to the ministry I had built, based on numbers, wealth, and success. I had to rebuild myself, and rebuild my congregation. It wasn't about flashy services or big donations anymore. It was about leading people to Christ with humility, service, and authenticity. Miriam stood by me through it all. There were moments when I could see the doubt in her eyes, the worry that I would fall back into old habits, that I would go back to seeking approval, to seeking success by the world's standards. But there were also moments when I could see the quiet hope, the trust in God's plan for me. "I see the change in you, Samuel," she told me one evening. "I see how heavy your heart was before, but now, you're lighter. You're not the man you were." Her words meant more than I could express. She had always been there, and now, she was my anchor as I navigated this new season of my life. It wasn't easy, it wasn't immediate, but every day, I moved forward with a renewed purpose. The true test, however, came when I returned to the pulpit. That first Sunday back was unlike any I had ever experienced. I walked into the church with the weight of my past failures heavy on my shoulders, but I also felt a new clarity. The room was filled with familiar faces, people I had known for years, people who had trusted me to guide them. I stood behind the pulpit, my Bible in hand, and for a moment I was silent. The words I had once spoken, words about prosperity, about blessings and success, felt like they belonged to someone else. They didn't reflect the Christ I had encountered in my NDE. The prosperity gospel had been a lie, and it wasn't the truth I could preach anymore. For the first time, I was genuinely ready to share the truth, not just a message about God's blessings, but a message about His love, His sacrifice, and His call to live humbly and authentically. "Church," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I have failed you." The room grew quiet, the weight of my words settling over the congregation. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with confusion, others with curiosity, but I had to speak the truth. For years I have preached a gospel of prosperity, a gospel that promised material wealth and success in return for faith. I misled you, and I misled myself. I have built a church based on worldly measures of success, attendance numbers, donations, status. But that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is not the way He called us to live. I paused, taking a deep breath. The words were difficult to say, but they needed to be said. The true church, the true body of Christ, is not a place for the rich, the famous, or the successful. It is a place for the broken, the humble, the ones who are willing to sacrifice and serve in love. It is not about how much we can take, but how much we can give to each other, to God and to the world, and that is the path I must walk now. I am not perfect. I have made mistakes, but I am asking for your forgiveness and for your help as we rebuild this church, not for numbers, not for success, but to serve God and each other. The silence in the room was profound. I could feel the weight of the moment, but also a strange sense of peace. I had spoken the truth, and it was the first time I truly felt the freedom of doing so. It wasn't about performance anymore. It wasn't about impressing anyone or maintaining a reputation. It was about living out the gospel authentically. In the months that followed, things began to shift. It wasn't easy. Some people left the church. They didn't understand what I was saying, or they didn't want to hear it, but many stayed. And the church began to grow, not in numbers, but in depth. People began to come for the right reasons, to seek God, to find spiritual healing, to grow in their faith. I started meeting with individuals, one-on-one, praying with them, helping them understand that the Christian life is not about what we can gain, but what we can give. We began focusing on community service, helping those in need, and serving our local area. We put spiritual growth first. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. People's hearts began to soften, and the true church, a community of love, humility, and service, started to emerge. One evening, Miriam and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. I could see the peace in her eyes, the same peace that had taken root in me. We had come so far. "I know it's not easy," she said, her hand resting in mine, "but I can see it. God is doing something in you, in all of us." I smiled, feeling the weight of those words. It wasn't easy, it wasn't always clear, but I knew now that this was the path God had called me to walk. The true path, a path of love, humility, and sacrifice. And with that, I knew that I had finally found my way. Jesus warned me that most churches today are fake, and I had no idea I was one of the people leading the charge. We've all heard the promises of wealth and success, but is that really what the gospel is about? I had to face the truth about the church I built, and it shook me to my core. So here's the question. Do you think the modern church is following Jesus' true message, or have we let the pursuit of wealth and success overshadow what it was meant to be? I want to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with what I saw, or do you think churches should focus more on prosperity? Let's talk about it in the comments.